turns out since my first Science Communication Award, when, as a 6th grader, I won the Stevenson County Soil and Water Conservation Essay Contest in Northwest Illinois, just across the Mississippi River, in the town where I grew up. I haven't changed a bit, right? So in that essay, I wrote about the conservation efforts of a radical farmer who lived 3 miles down the road from us. As kids, we called him Snortin' Don Norton. And we visited him often on spring and summer evenings because my dad had a large secondary garden on his farm. When it was too dark to continue working in the garden, we'd go up to his house, tell him thank you, and say goodbye to this kind and unconventional man. His house was always in permanent and total disarray. A rotting old man-style bachelor pad decorated with piles of newspaper, spent banana peels, and framed passages from the Bible on peeling walls. When he drove into town, on occasion in his big 70s era station wagon with overstuffed animals belted into each of the seat belts, we would wave, "Hi, Don." Don's last big risky project was to turn his farmland into a restored native forest. And that was the essay topic that resulted in my first Science Communication Award. He was a brave and bold man, Don Norton, the kind of risky altruist that I want to talk to you about later. But first, let's return to the present. In 2014, I founded the Alliance for Science, an organization that is changing the global conversation about food and agriculture. An organization dedicated to communication about the quality, quantity, and availability of food in the world, and the importance of science in making those decisions. The highlight of my career has been to work with an extraordinary alliance of change makers around the world, and I continue to be humbled by the impact that we're making and by our successes. And I want to take this opportunity to share with you why we've been so successful. And I encourage all of you to shamelessly steal our formula, because I believe it can change the world. I encourage this because this award really isn't about me. It's about how one woman, one person, any woman, any person can form alliances with bold and extraordinary people to change the world in bold and extraordinary ways. The reason why we've been so successful is because how we approach the global tables that we set every day for ourselves and for others. The Global Alliance for Science table. And tables is what I want to talk to you about today at this breakfast. Who is at our table? Who's invited to the table? What is on our table? And how can we make our tables more resilient? Whether it's a boardroom or a Thanksgiving feast, we take for granted who and what is on the table. We forget to question what's missing, who's missing, or how our food got there. Too often, our tables have been created by default, not mindfulness. Too often, our tables are created by default, not mindfulness. Today, I want to talk about how rethinking something as simple as how we approach the concept of the table can change the world. Look at the world as one big table, and it's there that the dynamics of communication are most exaggerated. If you want to understand a family's dynamic, you can learn a lot by watching them at dinner. For those of us who travel around the world, it's by sharing a meal that we achieve the most significant moments of cross-cultural communications and understanding. Are you interested in understanding a workplace dynamic? Observe just a few minutes of a meeting at that workplace. Pay attention to who walks in, how they greet each other, who sits where, who's encouraged to speak, and who isn't. Who leads the meeting? Who are the frequent contributors? Who takes notes? This cast breakfast is full of change makers. We have the power to re-examine our respective tables more critically and to set them more mindfully, even differently. And if we dare to, changing our tables will change the way we communicate and in turn help transform the world. We can achieve this mindfulness in 3 ways. 1, seek inclusivity, or better yet, reject exclusivity. Examine our historical past and see who's been missing. 2, form unlikely alliances. Commit to a better present by collaborating across difference. And 3, become risky and daring altruists. Never trust that our future will be okay if only we personally are doing well. Be bold and disruptive about our future to create real, transformative change for all. Let's start with rejecting exclusivity. Who's sitting at our table? The foundation of communication is not about being perfect. That's impossible. It's about just the opposite, being open to how flawed our communication can be, and then learning from our mistakes. The foundation of communication is humbling, and it's hard. But to quote the immortal Snoop Dogg, you've got to always go to the past if you want to move forward. And to be clear, a seat at the table does not always take the form of a chair or the shape of a table. A table can be any gathering, a business, a conference, a school, a university, a farm, a park, a sports arena. The other day, I brought my 2 sons and my daughter to the skate park in Ithaca, New York, where we live. And until we went to the skate park the other day, I was unaware that I had preconceived notions about who should and should not be at the skate park. But as it turns out, I had them. After we arrived, it took me a while to catch up to my kids near the stair set. But when I finally hung up from my conference call and looked around, I was surprised. I was surprised to see that the skate park was full, and full mostly of girls and young women. I was surprised. Watching in happy disbelief and contemplating that I indeed had expectations without knowing it. Well, that's when my 7-year-old daughter rolled up on her scooter and said, "Hey, Mom, that girl in the pink crop top, she's the one to watch." And then she went to the car and she traded her scooter in for a skateboard. It turns out that this inclusivity also did not escape the notice of my daughter, and it made an impact on her as well. As my daughter ran to the car, I wondered how many times little girls have asked their parents for a skateboard and how many had been told no. How many were too scared to step outside the gender and ethnic mold, knowing the pushback they might get, and didn't even ask? And who was that first wonderful parent who looked at their daughter and said, "Yes, of course"? Or even better, did some parent look at their daring daughter years ago, despite watching a world where boys almost exclusively rode skateboards, and say, "You know, I bet you'd be great at that. Would you like to try?" I have experienced exclusivity firsthand. And I'm going to share a story about one of my blind spots and how I handled it, or really how I mishandled it. And it's a hard story to tell, but it's a perfect example that we make mistakes. And what's important is that when we recognize our mistakes, that we learn, change, and grow, and we become better communicators, better allies, and better advocates. So here's the story. In October of 2018, Cornell University hosted the University Industry Consortium meeting, and this is a group of about 60 members from industry and academia who convene regularly to talk about the future of food and agriculture. So I was asked to organize a session, and my session focused on the role of biotechnology in international agricultural development, a topic very central to my work. So I invited some colleagues from Africa to participate, among them 2 Cornell alumni who have championed the development of the Water Efficient Maize for Africa project, WEMA, or TALA as it's called, as well as a good friend of mine named Patience Koku. Now, Patience is the CEO of Replenish Farms in Nigeria, which produces rice, soy, maize, vegetables, and seed. A former fashion entrepreneur, Patience reimagined her table and took up farming to pursue what she felt was a more meaningful occupation. Now, she's gone further and is reimagining tables for others, serving as a global champion for smallholder farmers and advocating for their access to improved seeds. Patience grows recently approved biotech crops, including BT cotton and BT cowpea, new crops for the African table of the future. And she's speaking here on Friday, so tune in. So the morning of our panel, I drove Patience and our other panelists to the venue in Syracuse. And when we entered the venue, just like at the skate park the other day, I was pleasantly surprised to see so many women in the room, because most agriculture meetings I attend have very few women. But what Patience saw was very different, and it was something that I had completely missed. All of the participants, men and women, were white. We had barely buckled our seatbelts for the ride home when Patience looked at me and pointedly asked, "Sarah, are there no black people in agriculture in America?" I paused, uncharacteristically speechless, and frankly, unaccustomed to talking about race. My knee-jerk reaction was to go into explainer mode, to explain the history of the United States. I did not handle this well. I did not see the exclusivity that she did, which of course was a problem. Instead, I brought my white American woman perspective to that table. She brought her black African woman perspective, and had she not been in the room at the table, I would not have seen it. But then, when confronted, I made excuses and I did more talking than listening. This moment has stuck with me, and I'm not proud of it, but I am proud of one thing. I committed to learning from it, and I have. Afterwards, I thought a lot about what I should have said. And it's so simple but so hard, because for those of us committed to making change, our mistakes are painful, and talking about them can make us feel incredibly vulnerable. Here's what I should have said. Patience, I'm embarrassed that I didn't notice that, and it's not okay. If you want to share your perspective on that and how we can change it, I would love to hear it. The foundation of building better communication is simply this. Understand we may miss things. Understand that even when we see them, we might not get it right, and that's okay. We can screw it up in the moment, but the important thing is that we learn from our mistakes. I carry that moment with Patience with me, and it's become part of what drives my vision. And that's why it means a lot to me that the World Food Prize is very much about inclusivity, forming unlikely alliances, risk-taking, and making sure that our future looks different than our past. Now, inclusivity sounds like a flowery, feel-good concept. Rejecting exclusivity is hard, and it doesn't always feel good, but it is fundamental to our ability to see our tables, really see them, and change them. Boardroom tables, holiday tables, school lunchroom tables, tables in church basements, restaurant tables, legislative tables, skate parks, and hospital wards. Our tables are all around us. And the way we can radically reimagine who we engage with at those tables is by having different people who can point out when whole classes of people are missing, by having girls in pink crop tops who inspire others just by being there, by having women like Patience say, "Where are the people of color?" by rejecting exclusivity, and by being inclusive by design. Changing who gets invited to our tables doesn't happen all at once, but we have to start somewhere. Someone somewhere was the first mom to hand their daughter a skateboard. At some point, NASA invited Sally Ride to the space program. Armed guards helped Ruby Bridges assume her rightful position at a school desk. You can be that person who offers a chair, a hand, and says, "Will you join me at my table? Will you join us at our table? And just as importantly, may we join you at your table." When you include someone, you're saying, "Welcome to my space. Please join us. Let us hear what you have to say." Let's create new tables together so that everyone seated thinks, "I'm welcome here. This space is ours." The girl in the pink crop top at the skate park understood one thing at that skate park. She was making the park as much hers as anyone else's. And that's part of what makes the Alliance for Science so successful. Each champion at the Alliance for Science creates tables with others, in their own cultural and country contexts, and the changes they create are exponential. The secret recipe of the Alliance for Science is not just that we don't exclude. We create welcoming spaces together where all feel included. Inclusivity is a powerful ingredient for big change. And that brings me to examine our next ingredient: form unlikely alliances. Once we've learned from our mistakes about improving inclusivity, rejecting exclusivity, how can we communicate across differences and form unlikely alliances? I was in the lobby of the Des Moines Marriott in October 2013 when I first pitched the need for a radical collaboration of daring communicators. The concept of the Alliance for Science, an organization of different people from all corners of the world with varying degrees of professional backgrounds, some with no degrees at all, from farmers to academics to social scientists to political leaders, all to form a global alliance for science with classes of global fellows at the center. Members of that first class included a radical Filipino priest, a soft-spoken vegan punk from Oakland, California, a Hawaiian papaya farmer whose day job was physical therapy, and a Ugandan coming in from the health sector. People and ideas from far-reaching geographical and ideological corners of the world coming together to promote increased access to agricultural innovations that can improve lives and the environment. We formed our alliances with disparate peoples. They were and they are our strength. And in grassroots mode, we continue to build even more powerful alliances based on those strengths. This new grassroots model of rejecting exclusivity and forming unlikely alliances was what was so transformative. And that was also what was so threatening to some people. But we'll get back to that. I want to tell you more about the work of the Alliance for Science. We teach innovative communicators from around the world to tackle big communication challenges, disinformation challenges, challenges born from fear and lack of empathy. We work to change minds about GMOs and other biotechnologies. We work to change the minds of regular people and the minds of powerful decision makers. We listen to people's fears, and we strive to meet them where they are, with empathy and facts. We work together across our differences. We're unlikely partners, and we're radical collaborators. Arif Hossain came to us in our first year. He was a bright, tech-savvy young man from Bangladesh who was motivated to shake up age-old systems in his country and do communications differently. And Arif is a great success story. He worked incredibly hard through a steep learning curve, and today, he is the CEO and executive director of Farming Future Bangladesh, the most innovative and nimble agricultural communication shop in his country. Arif was always good at knowing what he didn't know, and maybe that's why he was so good at working across difference and working across borders. Arif would form unlikely alliances even when it was culturally risky, like the time he invited Patricia Nanteza, our alliance's best storyteller, to Bangladesh to help him with a training for journalists. He got pushback for this alliance, for her youth, her race, and where she came from, but he didn't falter because he knew it was the best way to bring about change. Or take Ruamisu Mashumba, Slavia Tete, and Susanna Firi from 3 different countries in Africa who were part of our 2019 Alliance for Science Global Leadership Fellows class. Their allied passions sit at the intersection of farming and women's empowerment. These 3 champions are passionate about ensuring access to farming innovations, and they're committed to ensuring that the underserved are seated at the tables of the present and the future, especially those women across the African continent who bear much of the burden of farming and feeding the continent and yet have little access to land, seed, or capital. They strive to include the women who farm and form alliances with them. These are just a few of the many champions within the network of the Alliance for Science who are doing transformative work for food and agriculture. And we never would have found each other if the Alliance hadn't purposefully sought out people of diverse backgrounds, unlikely table mates, whom we purposefully joined together to be daring and risky altruists. Sometimes unlikely alliances are hard, and it's so much easier to work with people who we're comfortable with, either because we share a cultural background or we've worked together before. But magic happens when we take up the challenge and the risk of forming unlikely alliances. So risk. Let's talk more about that third topic, risky altruism. So what do we do when things are going well? How many people here, when things are going really well, think about changing that comfortable status quo for the riskier outcome of making it even better? How many are willing to throw away the familiar and risk further change? For how many of you is that your first instinct? Let's face it, it's uncommon. For most of us, the comfortable status quo is the very moment when we stop taking risks. But it is the very moment when people must take risks. The great irony is the very moment when we're best positioned to take risks is the very moment when we get too careful, too cautious, too afraid to upset the apple cart. But if those of us with power and privilege, those of us for whom things are going well, who are comfortable, if we don't take risks, then who's left? People who are struggling to get by? Is it fair to ask them to take the lead and create change? Of course it isn't. We have the resources to create real change, and we must do so for those and with those not always as well positioned to go big. It's only fair, and it is the right thing to do. Every time we've ever created real change is when we've dared to come out of our comfort zones. Every time there's been a societal change, it's because someone, somewhere, has voiced an unpopular opinion. Dr. Norman Borlaug, for whom this award is named, was successful because he pushed for radical changes in food production. He took the innovations to farmers in the most populous countries of the world, voiced unpopular opinion for changing the way that they were farming, and rejected exclusivity. He formed unlikely alliances to effect change. I work in a controversial field of biotechnology and science-based communications, and often I voice unpopular opinions. And so do all of the daring champions of the Alliance for Science who are working to advance access to agricultural innovations like biotech crops that we feel can improve agriculture and improve the environment. At the Alliance for Science, we're leveraging our unlikely alliances to tell better stories about biotechnology, stories that surprise, stories that inspire, stories that push us to wrestle with the contradictions within our own worldviews. Can we really call ourselves environmentalists and stand in the way of a biotech eggplant that reduces pesticide use by 62% for smallholder farmers in Bangladesh? As animal rights activists, can we oppose biotechnology that reduces animal suffering? As vegans, can we oppose biotechnology that creates plant-based meat substitutes? I want to introduce you to some of the storytellers of the Alliance, communicators who should be on this stage with me right now, because really, this is their award too. Patricia Nanteza, Joan Conroe, Father Noli, Pablo Orozco, Nkechi Isaac, Luis Ventura, Modesta Abugu, Arif Hossein, Joseph Apoku, Chris Knight, Bernardo Meme, Mark Linus, Wences Almazan, and so many more. Risk doesn't have to be huge. It can be as big as a girl skateboarding, as big as restoring a forest, as big as starting a new global organization, and it can look as risky as this, driving a GMO food truck to next year's World Food Prize. This is the Alliance for Science's latest innovation, Meat Modified, the hot truck for GMO food. This is our newest vehicle, literally, for community science engagement. We're going to drive the modified hot truck down both coasts, pulling up to food truck rallies, art and music festivals, shopping malls, bowling alleys, high schools, colleges, concerts, sports stadiums to engage people in real conversations about food and agriculture. And we will be visiting policymakers. Secretary Vilsack, Dr. Shavonda Jacobs-Young, we're coming your way. We want people to experience actual modified foods. We want to give people the opportunity to touch them, learn about them, talk about them, smell them, laugh about them, and most importantly, taste them. We want to hear what kinds of foods people would design if they were genetic engineers. What foods would they modify and why? How would those foods look, taste, feel, and how would people across America reimagine the produce aisles or their bakery shelves? At the Alliance for Science, we want to drive modified and listen and learn and collaborate in new and unexpected ways with the public, to form unlikely alliances with the people who are shopping at the grocery stores, farming rural fields, creating urban gardens, people forced to eat from urban food deserts. We want to talk to the people who vote with their hard-earned food dollars. And along the way, we want to team up with daring innovators out there, some among you, to create a beautiful, delicious, and healthfully splendid table of modified foods. In Modified, we will no doubt engage with people who have very different views on modified foods than we do. We might even get into some situations that feel risky, and believe me, this is no fast getaway vehicle. But if we don't try something different, we'll just keep reliving the same GMO debate that has stymied innovation and access to crops that have real, nature-positive, climate-resilient, nutrition-improving benefits. To be successful in our communications and everything else we do, we must get uncomfortable. Discomfort and risk are the two pillars for change. Every person in this room is here because you are massively successful. And I guarantee it took you some discomfort and risk to get here. The temptation for all of us is to hold on to our jobs, hold on to our livelihoods, our successes, and make sure things don't change. But we must think altruistically. We must be risk tolerant and even seek out risk. I call on all of you to be what I call a risky altruist. An altruist acts to promote other people's welfare, even at risk or cost to themselves. And going forward, I challenge us all to see past our own comforts and to consider other people's needs to create a future better suited for us all. I've always said it's my goal to work myself out of a job. If my work is relevant 30 years from now, I will have failed. I challenge everyone in this room to make themselves irrelevant, to go big and go risky. The Alliance for Science is sometimes met by people who have their arms crossed. And I was told once by a colleague that those young Alliance for Science fellows, they come back home and they have the audacity, they feel too empowered. They go off and they build their own initiatives and they disrupt the status quo. Great. People who have been in the biotech trenches for 30 years can feel threatened by young and daring communication innovators. And yes, the Alliance for Science champions are often met with extreme resistance in our quest to create change. But if they can do it, in most cases, people with much less power and privilege than those of us in this room, then so must we all. As Dr. Maya Angelou reminds us, courage is the most important of virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. To wrap up, the first step to transforming our tables is seeing and being open to what we didn't see before. So let's do that together right now. Take a moment to look at who is sitting with you. You don't even need to look around the room. Just look at who's sitting at your table. And after 30 minutes of conversation over breakfast, what did we learn about the people who we're sitting with that we didn't know before. Few of us were sitting with people we all already knew, and that's good. New faces alone can change the table. New faces add to that new dialogue, new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of doing things. It's a great start. Now look harder. Whom do you see? And as you were listening to my talk, did you ever feel a little uncomfortable? Have you thought about how you first felt when you sat down at that table? Did any of us look around and ask ourselves, yes, but who's not here that should be? 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been sitting at these tables. Maybe like many of you, I grew up in a tiny Midwestern farm town with limited opportunity. And it's only because people opened doors, offered seats at their tables, that I'm here with you today. From Don Norton opening his farm table, to my 6th grade teacher inviting me to the science communication table, to the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology inviting me and giving me a seat at this CAS table. Thank you, and I promise to pay it forward. And I reserve a big thank you to the man who introduced me a half an hour ago, my mentor, Ronnie Kaufman. Knowing Ronnie has been life-changing for me. And, he may look like an old boy from the club. He might look like someone with power and connections at the ag development table, and he is. But that's also why Ronnie is so extraordinary. Throughout his career, he has actively sought to bring new voices to the table. Ronnie seeks inclusivity. He forms unlikely alliances, and he is a risky altruist. In fact, Ronnie is one of the most humble and resourceful altruists I know. As department chair, Ronnie transformed the Department of Plant Breeding and Genetics at Cornell to achieve gender parity. As the chair of the Borlaug Global Rust Initiative, he is elevating opportunities for young scientists around the world through the Jeannie Borlaug Women in Triticum program. The WIT Award, as we call it, helps recruit and retain early career women working in the field of wheat. And this program has been so successful that he and the BGRI are working to expand this program to improve gender balance in all breeding programs across all crops. Ronnie played a key role in changing my life. He was bold and risky with his vision for the future, and he helped me believe in my own big, bold, and risky dreams. In a sense, Ronnie handed me my skateboard. And among other things, he taught me to beg for forgiveness, don't ask for permission, to live off what I could kill, to actively seek out and surmount insurmountable opportunities, and to surround myself with good people and not always people who looked like me. To do the right thing, no matter how difficult. Ronnie Kaufman looked at the past and found it unacceptable. He set new tables for the future of agriculture and development and included new voices and new faces. And when I sat at his table for the first time, I was grateful that he had included me. But soon, he helped me realize this table belongs to me, you, and so many others seated here. Those of us new to these tables, we're adapting to the feeling of inclusivity, and we're running with it. We're creating new alliances. We're advocating for risky, altruistic change, and we want you to join us. We want to join you at your tables. Change is hard, but it's contagious, and learning can be painful in the short run, but the joy it brings in the long term cannot be measured. Most people who have helped create this daring and risky adventure we call the Alliance for Science, they don't look like me. They come from all around the world. They have different perspectives, different skills, different challenges. But we share one thing. We believe that if we all sit down together and commit to a better world, we can create that brave new world together. And we believe that each of us brings something critically necessary to create that change. We are different. We are so different, but we're on the same team. Exclude no human being from your tables. Reject exclusivity. Be inclusive. Form unlikely alliances with those who make you question, think, and grow. And risk it all to rebuild a better world together. Set daring tables for tomorrow and make them bold. We can take up our hammers and we can build new tables. We can feed the world. We can change the world. We can create better futures for all of us. Together, we can do it. One chair at a time, one table at a time, one room at a time. But that time is now. Thank you.